This is the best entry-level and most practical sports car that money can buy, and it comes standard with a manual transmission. This is the 2023 Toyota GR86. This happens to be a premium model, and of course its counterpart, the Subaru BRZ, but they do have some differences that we'll get into later in the video. Now, practical is usually not a word you hear associated with sports cars, and for good reasons. But in this day and age, the average new car costs $45,000, which is the most expensive it's ever been. So most people are having to make a decision and need one car that can do everything. So in this case, you have the GR86, which is a sports car, but offers some more of that practicality that you can use in your day-to-day life, which is pretty important. And the best part is, this car has a base MSRP of $28,400. That's not too shabby. Now, the thing I really like about this is actually the second generation car, which debuted in 2022. And rather than redesign the wheel, Toyota and Subaru decided they would build on the success of the previous first generation car, which was a great car in its own right, but it did have some problems. So instead they decided to fix those problems, focus on some minor changes and one big change under the hood to improve and make a better version of the previous car. So in this video we'll be going through that and talking about some of those differences, highlighting the exterior, the interior, the powertrain, and then of course we'll take it for a drive. So moving on to the exterior, as we're taking a look at our GR86, this particular car is actually a premium, which means that with total options and everything, it comes around to just below $31,000. And this beautiful color you're looking at is Trueno Blue. So if you're interested in ordering your car, that is the color to look for. Obviously, the colors will vary a bit between Toyota and Subaru, depending on which car you decide to go with, but this Toyota is what we have today, and I personally prefer the Toyota to the BRZ, and I'll be telling you why in a bit. So looking here at the front of the car, there's a couple different changes we can see right off the bat. The Toyota tends to have a bit of a sharper nose compared to the BRZ. I prefer it. I think it makes it look that much more aggressive, but aside from that, they're pretty similar as far as aesthetics go and some of the rear bumper stuff and things like that. Now in the front here, it looks very similar to the previous generation car. Obviously, we have some more curvaceous tones to it, and it looks a bit more modern, which I do appreciate. But one of the other cool parts, just by looking at the car, is you can see everything that's functional. All of these grills and even these side ducts here are actually all functional, and they come along with a variety of other changes that you can't see just by looking at the car. On top of that, underneath, the car has actually been reinforced. It's now a bit more stiff, and we have some newer lightweight panels as well. Both these fenders here, the quarter panels and the roof, are now aluminum, which offers a really cool situation there, especially with this double bubble roof that you can see on the top, and will also be repeated on the inside of the car as well. All very cool features as we get around to it. More importantly, let's take a look at the side so we can see more of the features and what's going on underneath. So moving on to the side of the vehicle, this is where we can see a lot more cool details about the vehicle as well. We have our LED adaptive headlights up front, but more importantly, let's get into some of the technical stuff I mentioned earlier. As we take a look at the front here, we have those vent exits that I talked about for the front that go into the wheel well to kind of help with some cooling, but they actually have another vent out here that exits in the rear. And this, of course, is to help remove some of that turbulent air that can get caught up in the wheel well. Again, just more things to help improve with the performance, but it's cool to see that it's all functional. And if you wanted to modify the car, also things that you could use in that way to change things a bit up. Now, just taking a look at some of our first premium details as opposed to the standard model, we have our 18-inch wheels here. Now, these are pretty cool. These remind me of some of the wheels that are available on the GR Supra as well. But what's cool about these wheels is these are actually an inch bigger than the base model. So one of the benefits of going with the premium, you'll get 17s if you go with the standard car. But these are actually wrapped in Michelin Pilot Sport 4 tires, which are pretty cool, and they'll have no problem gripping up the car as well. Behind that, you do have some McPherson's front suspension, and then we have some 2-piston brakes that sit up there. So obviously a lot of room for upgradability in terms of what you can do there, but I think that's part of the magic that comes with the car. If you wanted to build it and make it to your own, you can certainly do that. There's certainly more room for performance that's left on the table for the aftermarket. As we continue down the car, we do have our black power mirrors. Now, one of the things I really like about these mirrors is the fact that the blind spot indicators are actually on the inside of the mirror, which means it's not on that far side of the mirror that you might not notice so much while you're driving, but it's going to be right next to you while you're driving, making it that much easier to see. When you see the light up, you can pretty much always see it even out of the corner of your eye, no matter what you're doing in the car, which I think is a pretty cool feature. We have our double bubble roof we talked about earlier with our color keyed shark fin for, of course, our radio systems. There's some dragonflies, and then we move to our keyless system over here. And I love this keyless system. I think it's super easy to use. It works basically instantaneously, and I love the system. Just makes it easier to live with the car. We have this cool body line down here that flares up, makes it look a bit more dramatic, cool, more sports car bits. And then as we get to the rear, we have again our 18-inch wheels with single piston caliper brakes. Again, lots of room for upgradability. But on top of that, we do have a multi-link rear suspension that of course has a Torsen anti-spin differential, which is a pretty cool thing to have, and that comes standard across the board. So obviously lots of upgradability, and the premium doesn't actually cost that much more despite the fact that it's got some more upgrades. But let's get to the back. So moving on to the back of the car, we have some pretty simple details. It's a very good looking car, very reminiscent. This feels very Subaru to me, just looking at it. Feels like the new WRX a bit. But we have another premium detail on the exterior, and that's this fin here. So this fin is basically glued on top of the existing trunk, which the existing trunk already has a little bit of like a pseudo spoiler duck build to it, and this just accentuates that a bit more to make it look that much more sporty. On top of that, we have this nice black trim which runs between the taillights, but what they don't show you is that the button to open the trunk is actually hidden back here, which I think is a pretty cool detail so it doesn't ruin the lines of the car. And now that you've opened your trunk, I like that it opens vertically. It means that you can fit more stuff in there and you're not limited by the opening so much or limited by the trunk getting in the way. And then you get a fairly sizable trunk that can certainly hold a good amount of bags in there, certainly more than you would find in, let's say, a Miata if you were going to be cross-shopping that with this car. So I think this is a pretty big deal as far as the practicality for the car is concerned. And of course, you even have the back seats if that's not quite enough for you. We have some GR86 badging, we have a dual exhaust, we have this cool little like Formula One style brake light down low, and just a general good looking car. Everything's fairly compact, tucked in. It's a pretty good looking car. But with that, I think it's time that we go ahead and jump into the interior so we can see what's going on in there. So now we're on the inside of the 2023 Toyota GR86, which is a 2+2 coupe. Now what that means is you have 2 seats in the front and then 2 seats in the back. Now, I don't think Toyota and Subaru intended people to really use the back seats, but what they are helpful for is if you have pets or maybe really small children that you absolutely wanted to fit back there, you definitely could, and you could put them in the back and you have some more practicality. But what I'd like to use it for is, in addition to pets, like if you have a passenger and you're going on road trips, you can put like your day bags or a cooler back there, things you might want access to while you're doing the drive. So that's a pretty cool feature as opposed to the Miata where it would be in the trunk and you'd have to stop the car, pull over, pull out of the trunk, and then you could get to it. You can just have it right behind you here, and it also just adds this extra storage, and if you happen to fill up the trunk, you have more room behind you as well to just shove some more stuff into. Now, getting onto the actual details of what's in the interior. Obviously, this is mostly plastic construction, which is to be expected. It's a cheap sports car, not a luxury car, but one of the things I really appreciate are some of the little details that they paid attention to that make your interactions with the car that much better. So what they did is a lot of the touch points and some of the surfaces you'll touch often essentially are all coated with a desirable material. So we have this ultra suede that can be found above the gauge cluster, on the doors, but then we have leather. We have a leather steering wheel, a leather shift knob, leather handbrake, and even a leather door pad on the door. So those are the things that you'll be touching as opposed to some of the random plastic bits. You're not really going to worry about it because you're not going to be touching it that often. On top of that, we have these nice aluminum pedals with GR86 logos on the floor mats that just adds for a general nice experience. Once you sit in the car though, that's where the nice fun starts because of these awesome seats. In the front, we have these bolstered bucket seats, and they have very good bolstering in the side that fits me very comfortably. And then we have some leg bolstering as well. Now what this does is that means when you're taking this car for your fun joyrides on the weekends, or maybe you even want to take it to a track day, this is going to help hold you in place. And I think it does a phenomenal job, especially for a street car. It's not too much where it makes it too hard to get out of the car. So this is a huge plus, and the seats are comfortable. And in this case, we have some of our first premium features. With the premium trim, you actually get heated seats as well. So if that's a must for you and you live in a cold area, you may want to consider paying a little bit more for the premium, which, like I said, is about $4,000, $3,000 more to get into this trim level. Now, getting into some of the other details that'll be standard, we have a 7-inch multi-informational display with a cool startup that sits in here that that can be adjusted and actually changes when you decide to use your track mode. So in the center here, right behind the shifter, you have traction control off, and then you have your track mode, which you hold that, it changes the gauge display to give you a more track focused display that it'll even beep when it wants you to shift, things like that, kind of cool details, but it also turns off traction control. So in that sense, it's not really recommended for a street driving mode, but is perfect for the track. So some things to keep in mind there. In the middle here, we have our 8-inch display, and this 8-inch display does come with Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, which is basically standard these days, but you also have your normal Bluetooth interaction bits. Below that, a lot of the AC knobs and controls and things like that that are similar to the previous generation. And then we have a GR start-stop button, which is pretty cool as well. This car does have cruise control, which is a pretty big deal, and it's just a great looking interior, pretty decent sound system with 8 speakers, but it also has an amp and a sub, which is a pretty big deal as well. But it's not to say that the car's not perfect. There are some other issues, and let's talk about those gripes. First one's going to be the turn signal. So the turn signal doesn't actually lock in place. It's this activated turn signal, let's say. It's like a toggle switch essentially. If you pull it all the way down, it starts the turn signal, but it won't go off until you either complete your turn, but if you're changing lanes, then you have to flick it back up the other way ever so slightly to turn it off, which sometimes results in you overdoing it, and now the turn signal's going the other way, and then you look like an idiot. But aside from the fact, you can do a light touch still, and that's going to give you your 3 flashes to do lane changes. But it's annoying. It's just a bad design, and I think they could have done a lot better in that instance. The second gripe is going to be with the cup holders. So there are 4 cup holders within reach of the front here, which is normally really good, especially for a sports car where you're very limited. However, the problem is you have one in each door, and they even have these little pictures telling you don't put open containers as they'll spill, because it doesn't adjust. It's not tight. You can't put anything in there. Really, it's just for like bottled water, things with a cap that you can put on there and not worry about slashing around. Then the other 2 cup holders are here in the middle that we can open up with the center console. The problem with these is the fact that they don't adjust either, and they're right behind the shifter. So 2 things can happen here. As you're driving and you shift, your elbow's going to bump into it, or maybe you don't want to bump into it and now you're shifting awkwardly, or 2, they're just not going to be held in place, and if something happens, you accelerate quickly, whatever, they're now rocking, spilling, whatever the case. None of the cup holder situations are good in this car. Yes, a lot of people say you shouldn't be drinking that whenever while you're driving, but whatever. Some of us like to have water on long road trips and things like that. But with that, that's a quick look at the interior. Fairly good. Everything is useful, and it has a lot of quality touch points, which I think makes it perfect at this price point for what you need it to do. So with that, let's go ahead and take a look at what's under the hood. So under the hood of our 2023 Toyota GR86 is a naturally aspirated 2.4-liter boxer 4-cylinder. That does have this plastic cover that says Toyota Subaru boxer, but this is actually definitely from the Subaru side. This engine is actually shared with the Subaru Ascent SUV. Now that's not a real big deal. What is a big deal is that the previous car actually had a torque dip problem. The torque curve tended to fall off, and so you didn't actually get a lot of acceleration that you wanted, and it kind of ruined and dampened some of the driving experience. But that problem has been fixed. Now this engine produces 228 horsepower and 184 pound-feet of torque, which is a considerable improvement over the previous car, especially about 25 horsepower on that end. But more importantly, that torque curve's been improved, and now you have a significantly better driving experience. So that's a pretty big deal there. On top of that, this car comes standard with a 6-speed manual transmission, which is what is in this car, which is equipped with the premium options. Now that 6-speed is a close ratio gearbox. It does have a short shifter, and it's actually been improved from the previous car. It's been strengthened, and a lot of other things make sure it can handle more power and then provide a smoother driving experience as well. So I think that's a pretty cool touch. More attention to detail to just improve the overall driving experience, but more importantly, as we talked about some of those other torque curves. On top of that, we have that Torsen limited slip differential I talked about earlier that's in the back, and that comes standard, which is a must-have feature for a sports car, in my opinion. Now, with all of that, this car weighs just 2,833 pounds, which is incredibly lightweight and a big plus to any time you're going to be checking out a sports car. Obviously, that's a bit heavier than a Miata, but you do get a bigger car with more horsepower, so there are some trade-offs there. Because of that, this car does 0 to 60 in around 6.1 seconds with a top speed of 140 miles per hour. That's not too shabby, certainly faster than you can go legally anywhere anyways, so this car will be plenty of fun, even more racetracks. In that reason, you can't hit that speed in most racetrack straights, but this car is a ton of fun in that regard. Now, On top of that, let's talk about fuel economy. It's not a huge concern if you're going to be driving a sports car, but it is better, and it's good to talk about just to get it out of the way. This car has a fuel economy rating of 20 city and 27 highway, which gives it a combined rating of about 22 miles per gallon, which isn't too bad. And on top of that, you have a 13.2 gallon fuel tank. So with that, you'll be able to get a good reach to most places, certainly over 300 miles of range as well, which is going to be a nice plus when it comes to getting out and driving your car a bit more. Now let's talk about some of the other details, specifically some of the other Subaru bits and the changes between the two cars. Now, because we have a front engine with the transmission connected right to the back of the engine, this car does have a bit more of a front weight bias. It's about 55 to the front, 45% to the rear. On top of that, with some of the other Subaru changes, what we've got here is we have obviously the similar suspension, all that bits are all mostly the same, but what is different is the steering knuckles for the GR86 are actually steel. On the Subaru BRZ, they're aluminum. Now, I'm sure the weight savings is fairly insignificant, but if you felt so heavily that you must have the lightweight parts, I'm sure you'd be able to buy the Toyota, then buy the Subaru GR86 steering knuckles, and I'm sure they would be interchangeable with each other if you wanted to worry about your centrifugal mass. On top of that, there's actually a bit of a suspension tuning difference as well. The Toyota tended to go soft in the front and stiff in the rear, which they wanted to help with getting the car to feel a bit more sideways, but really you won't really notice a lot of the changes that you'll find between the two cars. They're going to feel very similar regardless of which car you go with, but now you know the differences, and maybe that'll influence your purchase decision on which brand you decide to purchase the car from. Either way, it's going to be a good decision. With that, I think it's time that we go ahead and take it for a drive. So what's it like to drive the GR86? Well, of course, it's going to be phenomenal. It doesn't get much better than this. This is, of course, one of the best entry-level sports cars available, and the fact that this one has a 6-speed manual transmission just makes it that much more engaging while you're driving the car, and I really appreciate that. You know, you won't find much better driving experiences like this, especially around this price point, other than maybe the Mazda Miata. But if you choose to go with the Miata, which I personally feel is a better driving car, you're now making some compromises in terms of overall space and practicality of the car. So those are some things to keep in mind. But how does this car drive? Well, it drives great. The clutch and the transmission can take a little bit getting used to, but once you get in there, it's really not so bad, and the car becomes a ton of fun to use. It's pretty easy. It's also really, I would say, respectful or really nice to the driver. This car is not going to abuse you if you mess something up. It's going to be fairly easy to fix the problem, so to speak, no matter what that looks like. And so I kind of really appreciate that. It also makes it kind of more beginner friendly. So maybe you're looking to purchase this car to learn manual on, it'll be pretty easy. As far as some of the driving dynamics, the car feels very planted. Obviously, it's going to be a little bit softer for the sake of just being a car that you can daily drive, but I really do enjoy the way everything feels. It's a very smooth car, but it's also stiff, and the seat bolsters hold you in place really well, at least for a street car, and you leave a lot of upgradability ahead as well. So you can buy this car with the intention of driving it in a sporting occasion, even using it as a daily. But if you wanted to turn it into a track car, that would be really easy to do. It wouldn't take much effort. The car is very modifiable, but it's already a great starting platform. The brakes feel good despite being a smaller braking system, but it's also a fairly lightweight car. The torque pickup, everything feels pretty good for the most part. Obviously, towards the high end there feels a little bit better, but it's still a very quick, very responsive feeling car, and you feel sporty. You got that nice low down seating position. It's honestly just a really pleasurable car to drive, and I will say for this car in particular, I've driven the automatic as well. The manual is by far the way to go. Nobody should be buying an automatic for this car. It's meant to be driven with a manual transmission, and Toyota did a pretty good job with the manual in this car, and so it's easy to drive. It's gonna be fun. It's gonna get you that engagement. You could easily daily this car. So that's what I think. Fairly keep it short and sweet here. It's just a great car to drive. That's it. If you get the opportunity to drive one of these, do it, because it's some of the most fun that you can have with your pants on. So in conclusion, you have a phenomenal out-of-the-box experience with the GR86 and BRZ. On top of that, it's a very practical car that offers a variety of situations and accommodations so you can daily drive it wherever you want to go, which I think is a fantastic compromise in this day and age. On top of that, it's a fantastic platform that offers a lot of upgradability so you could build and tune the car to your likeness or whatever your use case is. Now, sure, there are more vehicles that are better in certain situations, like the ND Miata, for example, just offers a more fun, better driving experience, but it offers nowhere near the practicality that this car does. There are faster cars, but not near this price point of $28,000, and this just offers the best of both worlds and offers a lot of upgradability and things moving forward. So if you're considering the GR86 or BRZ, I strongly suggest you head down to your dealership and take it for a test drive, because I don't think you'll regret it. It's a fantastic car. Now, sure, it has a few quirks and things that could be fixed, but maybe you can find a solution for that in the aftermarket, and I think there's just nothing quite like it at this price point, and this is simply the best modern sports car that you can buy from a practical standpoint that is on sale today. With that, if you enjoyed the video, could hit that like button for me, I'd really appreciate it, and consider getting subscribed for more content like this in the future. Are you planning on purchasing one, or do you already have one? Let me know down below, and of course, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.